Somehow like that, probably actually. Uh, but you seem to have been doing a lot of stuff. So
Mm, yeah. Yeah, I've been
so
playing around.
right,
Yeah,
I'm recording the session. Just what I'll when we kind of go through some questions, then I mean I might be editing and posting it a bit, or I'll send you the copy as well if you want to post something out of it if you find it interesting.
sure.
Then
Yeah, I probably will. That sounds great.
yeah, okay, cool. So yeah, you have been doing some cool stuff the
Yeah,
last.
I've been playing with my macros a lot, but so I've been well, so I've been trying some actually some low fat, high carb uh strategies, and one of the things that I've had is I've had persistent high fasting blood glucose in the morning that I haven't, I've tried a bunch of different things, and I was doing some fasting, and that did help, but it wasn't. It was basically alternate day fasting, and that got it down, but that didn't feel sustainable to me long term.
Mhm.
Um, and so then I'd seen some papers showing that a high, um, the going to a low fat diet could help with that. So I figured I would try it. I looked at a lot of stuff. I like redox science and redox balance stuff, as you probably know. So I was looking at that, and I was actually, and I right, I was I was as someone who's come from keto, and I was of course a little bit reticent to try it, but then I decided I was just going to go all in. I'd read a bunch of these overfeeding studies using carbs from like the 80s and 90s,
Yeah.
and I was like, well, it wasn't so bad. So I decided to go all in, and I did like 1,000 grams of carbs 2 days in a row just to see what would happen. Would I gain 10 pounds? But I didn't, and I was like, okay, well, maybe we
Maybe
could
something
try
good.
this. And so I did a trial, and it didn't work. Um, so I was like, okay, well, it wasn't bad. I didn't gain weight or anything. I lost a few pounds at first, but then it plateaued pretty quick, and my fasting blood glucose was still high. And so I was kind of like, at this point, I'd tried 10 different things, and I kept running across these studies in the literature that said, one of the things that can probably affect fasting blood glucose in a causal way is if you have elevated branched chain amino acids. And branched chain amino acids are increased in obesity, and they seem to affect blood glucose. And so I said, okay, I'll try it. And I removed, and I basically stopped eating. I want to say this correctly. I stopped eating protein from skeletal muscle, and I stopped eating protein from grains or any plant-based sources of protein. And so I have very tight control over the types of protein that I'm eating, and they're almost all collagen sources or gelatin. And so I'm a butcher, and a cook, and I like to cook. So like I've been doing a lot of pig's feet.
Mhm.
I kind of slow boil them and then roast them, and I'll eat that with something like cassava, which is a very low protein source of starch.
Mhm.
I've been doing head cheese. I've been doing a lot of bone broths and gelatin, and so I'm kind of combining. Right, I'm sort of combining these tropical starches with a lot of connective tissues. And when I made that switch, my fasting blood glucose normalized within a week. And I
I saw
think
it.
there's something, and just to finish the thought, so the other thing you see in obesity is you see high fasting branched chain amino acids. You also see low glycine, and glycine is really common in gelatin, connective tissues, collagen, whatever you want to call it. And um and glycine is hard to get through. There's not a lot of dietary sources that are high in glycine other than gelatin.
Yeah.
And there's a really interesting paper in rats, and what they showed was that the branched chain amino acids in the diet, or I should say, if you're several points here. One is that I'm not saying branched chain amino acids are bad. That's not at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that for a lot of people, if you're insulin resistant, you can't break down those branched chain amino acids. And it's because of this enzyme, branched chain keto acid dehydrogenase, which is similar to pyruvate dehydrogenase. But anyway, I hope to get out of I hope to fix myself and then be able to eat skeletal meats again, right, and still be insulin sensitive. So that's the long-term goal. But in the short term, I'm restricting them. And sorry, to get back and finish the point about glycine. In the rats, what they showed was that branched chain amino acids were driving down glycine in skeletal muscle. And the glycine actually helps to pull kind of extra unburned fuel out of the mitochondria in the form of like acyl carnitines, acetyl carnitine, propionyl carnitine, a lot of these short chain things that if you're not, burning your fuel efficiently, build up in the mitochondria, and they lead to, what do they call it? Energy toxicity is a phrase a lot of people use. I like to call it reductive stress, but the glycine can help actually relieve that. What happens is the glycine goes into your skeletal muscle and it binds, it forms adducts with the acetyl groups from the acetyl-CoA, bind to the glycine, and then you just urinate out the glycine with the acetyl group on it. And so the glycine is literally helping you to pull the extra unburned fuel out of your mitochondria that is keeping you in this reductive stress, poor burning state. That's what the study in the rat show. And there really is this interplay between the branched chain amino acids and the glycine. And so, that's the theory, right? That's in the paper. And so I was like, I'm going to try it. And like I said, within a week, the high fasting blood glucose was gone for me. So, obviously that's cool because I'm not pre-diabetic anymore. But it's also nice to see, a mechanism that's in the literature, that someone's found this mechanism, and you try it and it works. You're like, oh, great.
Yeah. Cool. So all the things that you described, I want to kind of, which is super interesting for me, because this is a problem so many people face, and they just don't have a clue basically how to start or how to address it. I would like just to pick your brains a bit and just break it apart and
Sure.
see if we can make some sense out of it. And I'll start way back, because in your recent podcasts or posts whatsoever, you said you lost a bunch of kilos, or quite a lot of kilos, with keto. So why, first of all, did you stop keto? I mean, was it, you think, unsustainable, or what was it?
Right. It's a handful of reasons. One is I think that I'm, really the main reason is it wasn't working for me as well anymore. I lost a lot of weight on keto in my late 20s and early 30s. Now I'm in my mid 40s. And it was a lot harder, right? It wasn't the sort of magic that it used to be for me. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure there's a lot of reasons for that, right? NAD plus levels decline as you age, etc. And so that kind of got me, it just got me thinking. And of course, a lot of this started with me thinking about, it was really Peter from the blog Hyperlipid, that sucked me into thinking about mitochondrial science more deeply. I'd taken biochemistry at Cornell, and you have to learn, of course, about the electron transport chain and how mitochondria works, but I hadn't really thought about it much since then. And so that sort of thinking really started to draw me in. And partially, I think for me, keto is, I went to the French Culinary Institute, and I have a chef background, and it's sort of like, and I love, like, sort of, I don't know, the history of food and cuisine. And so I have all these papers or studies, like I have the 1939 yearbook of agriculture, what we ate in America, you know, and I can see there's all these healthy cultures that are eating carbohydrates, right?
Mhm.
And they're lean and they're metabolically healthy. And I guess I knew that I was missing something. Something had to be right. There's
Yeah, but
something about keto that, for me at least, I wanted to figure out why, you know, why can't I burn carbohydrates? Like, what's the problem with them? Like, why? And so that, for me, it's sort of just philosophically, I'm interested in it. Um, and so that's the road that I've been kind of going down, is trying to, you know, let's see if I can get back to, you know, is it possible? I mean, I was never right. I was obviously had abdominal obesity in first grade, right? I remember being embarrassed about it. So I've never been a person who's had great uh, metabolic health, right? Even from the earliest days, and everyone in my family pretty much struggles with obesity. So you know, I didn't, right, I didn't start off great. So now I'm saying, but okay, can someone who um has struggled with this their whole life, is there a way to become an efficient sort of, like, I don't know, glucose burner? Or once you understand um how the thing works, right? That's really what this is about.
that's a big question. Yeah, exactly. Because for me, okay, I guess by doing keto, I mean, uh, the one of the main goals is reduce insulin levels, absolute,
Right.
and but at the end reverse insulin resistance. Although some say, okay, you switch from one type of insulin resistance to another, from the pathological to the physiological. But then so what, I guess you did not have the success of reversing insulin resistance that you expected with keto, maybe. And then
Yeah.
let's define also insulin resistance, because you refer it a couple of times in your videos, and you
Yeah.
mentioned IR, but what's your definition there?
So for me, it's I would say that it's, so one of the things I've been doing is I've been giving myself oral glucose tolerance tests, they call it, and you just you eat 75 grams of glucose. If you go into a clinic, you know, they give you like this glucose drink. It's like a
Yeah.
liquid glucose. I've just been using glucose tablets that you can buy in the diabetic section at the drugstore. But anyway, you eat 75 grams of sugar and you follow your blood glucose curve for 2 hours, and that kind of tells you, right? Because what you see in the literature is that people who are obese, or, you know, diabetic or insulin resistant, however you want to say it, they are slow to switch over to burning glucose when they eat a glucose meal. So so like a lean person that's metabolically healthy, if you give them you know, whatever, a bagel, they start to burn that glucose right away. As soon as it hits the system, they're burning it. An obese person can't do that. What happens is there's a lag of maybe half an hour to an hour before they can even start to burn that glucose. And in that meantime, in that hour, of course, their blood glucose is high. You know, what are they doing with the glucose? Well, they're probably doing DNL or other things that are not really what you want, right? And so that seems to be the difference. And so for me, I'm looking at I'm trying, you know, fasting blood glucose is interesting, right? I think that tells us something. But to me, it's, if I eat a bunch of glucose, I want to burn it, right? I want to burn it as fuel. I don't want to store it. I don't want to, right. And so that's what I'm trying to monitor by watching what happens to the blood glucose curve after meals, and watching what happens with body temperature too. You know, that's another, so if you can burn glucose efficiently, it's actually pretty thermogenic. And so um, now I've gotten to where if I eat a big, like maybe you saw it on Twitter, but I've been eating pancakes every morning. This is my sort of like training regimen to burn glucose better, right? And they're cassava flour pancakes. Cassava flour, like I say, is very low in branched chain amino acids, and it's a pretty slowly absorbed form of starch. So it's, it's a low glycemic index, they would say. And so I just eating that every morning, and it's about 200 grams of carbohydrate. And but within 15 minutes of eating it, my body temperature is usually over 99. It'll be like 90. This morning it was 99.3. And that seems to be pretty standard now. And so, that's another sign that you're actually, you're burning the fuel, because your metabolic rate is increasing when you eat, which is what's supposed to happen, right? But it doesn't happen for a lot of people. And so I'm just trying to pull a lot of levers to help myself get better at actually burning glucose, right? Because for me, to be truly metabolically healthy, you should be able to, if you want to have metabolic flexibility, right, you should be able to burn glucose efficiently. And that is the thing that most of us can't do. And so that's maybe the hardest one to get back. But I think that, until I can do that, I don't think I can call myself perfectly metabolically healthy. That's just how I think about it.
That's a very big topic, and I mean, I'll come back to that, because I think, okay, mostly people, when they wake up, for example, they should be burning mostly fat, right? So, and we know it also,
agreed.
Okay, the RQ, etc., and everything, we should be burning mostly fat. But then, indeed, when there is glucose available, then we should be able to switch over and be efficiently using that. Either that's because of exercise or when we mostly eat. But that's probably how at least I define metabolic health. But on the other hand, the interesting part, and maybe to stick a bit with the keto people, is that some keto people have low glucose, I mean super low, 70, etc., and some have super high. So what do you think that the difference would be for those people? Is it the branch in amino acids, or maybe something else?
It could be. I mean, I think, right, I think you can be essentially, I think you can have a lot of these problems, and I think that keto will hide them, right? If you can't burn glucose, if you're in reductive stress, I think you can do keto and you can kind of cover up those problems a bit, right? And there's also other people who do keto and they probably do regain their metabolic flexibility. And that, that might be the difference. And how would you test that? I mean, it's kind of tricky, right? You'd have to have somebody say okay, maybe eat carbs for a week or something to get back into carb burning mode, and then do an oral glucose tolerance test or something, something along those lines, to know if you're truly metabolically healthy or not. If that high fasting glucose is a sign of,
of insulin resistance,
pathological insulin resistance, if you want to call it that.
I think it's it's a very tricky question, actually. So I because also it's about balance. So many people so you wake up, maybe you have 20 or 50 grams of carbs, and then you wake up and you have typically, I don't know, glucose of 100, for example, and then you're kind of in this gray zone. You say, okay, what should I do? Should I lower my carbs to 0, or should I increase them, right? And a lot of people find themselves in this swampland. I don't know.
Well, that is, I mean, that's Denise Minger's term, but I think it's actually a really useful term. And so, and so I hear it. So I get this question a lot, right? People saying I've been ketogenic, and I think what you're saying is interesting, and I'm going to start eating 2 potatoes a day, just to throw out a random example. And I guess what I would caution about that is that with that approach is that if you start eating, like you say, 50 or 100 grams of carbs, it's not really enough probably to push you into full on sort of like uh I don't know what I don't know what the term is. Like it's not going to push you into a carbohydrate centric metabolism, right? You're still going to be your base metabolism is still going to be ketogenic, and so you still might be pretty bad at using that glucose. So if you add 100 grams of glucose or 150 grams of glucose to a ketogenic diet, you might still just wind up using that glucose to do de novo lipogenesis, etc.
Yeah.
Instead of burning it cleanly as fuel, because you're not, really set up to do that based on just what your diet's been, right?
Do you think this is more a matter of carbs, like amount of basically glucose, or also the more insulin, or the like?
Well, I think, for me, it usually comes back to like the Randle cycle. So the Randle cycle is this kind of it basically describes the interplay between burning fat and burning glucose, right? And so if you look in the mitochondria, what happens is when you're burning a lot of fat, typically acetyl-CoA levels rise. Acetyl-CoA, for people who don't know, is acetyl groups are just a little two carbon molecule, and that's what gets burned in the Krebs cycle. So if you eat stearic acid, it's an 18 carbon long thing, so it gets broken into 9 acetyl groups. And glucose gets broken into 2 acetyl groups, right? And that's what goes in the mitochondria. Anyway, when you're burning fat, acetyl-CoA levels typically rise in the mitochondria, and that inhibits your ability to burn glucose because it blocks pyruvate dehydrogenase, which is the main enzyme that sort of controls your ability to burn glucose. So then what happens is you eat some carbohydrates, insulin rises. Insulin stops your fat cells from releasing fat. It's called lipolysis, but your fat cells are like releasing all this fat for you to burn, right? When insulin signals, the fat cells stop releasing the fat via lipolysis. Your free fatty acids, which is sort of the fat that's available for you to burn immediately, drop. And that causes less fat to be shuttled into the mitochondria. And when that happens, the acetyl-CoA levels drop, and then pyruvate dehydrogenase becomes uninhibited, and now glucose can be burned again. So the enzyme pyruvate dehydrogenase turns on, and you start burning glucose again. And what's interesting about that, from my perspective, is this. And this goes back to hyperlipid and thinking about redox and all this. So pyruvate dehydrogenase actually creates reactive oxygen species as it goes. So if you can get it to start up, it'll start cranking out reactive oxygen species. And a lot of people think that sounds bad, that sounds scary. But what we do with the reactive oxygen species that are made at pyruvate dehydrogenase is we actually use them to regenerate NAD+. And NAD+ is the thing that, well, you need 3 NAD+ to burn a single molecule of acetyl-CoA, right? And so all of our food is converted into acetyl-CoA, and the more NAD+ you have, the faster you can burn the calories. And when pyruvate dehydrogenase is active and it's working, it's going to crank out these ROS, and that's going to give you more NAD+, and you're going to be able to run faster and faster. And I think that's why, like I was saying, if you can actually burn glucose, it becomes pretty thermogenic. And I think that mechanism is the reason why. It's this ability for it to essentially regenerate its own NAD+. And what there was this old adage that they would teach medical students, which is fat burns in the flame of carbohydrate, which is something that I reference a lot. But I think it's an interesting thing to think about, because when you're burning pure fat, one of the problems, if you are, someone like myself who is, for whatever reason, I don't know what the I'm sure there's a genetic reason that I could look at, but I don't care that much. But like, right, I've never been a super efficient fuel burner of anything, right? Like that's why you have abdominal obesity in first grade, right? And so for someone like myself, I think when I'm burning pure fat and I have, high acetyl CoA, what happens is, especially if you're not super efficient, then you build up these what are called acyl carnitines, and these are like when the mitochondria is really high in acetyl CoA and other short chain fats, um, they get switched onto this molecule called carnitine, and they get kind of held.
Mhm.
It's like a buffering system, right? And so those can build up too. And so now you have all this fuel sitting unburnt in your mitochondria. You have the acetyl CoA, and you have this whole buffer of acyl carnitines. And so now I go to right. So now I've been ketogenic. My metabolism isn't perfect. Now I go to eat some glucose, right? And the problem is, so now insulin signals, the lipolysis slows down. My cells can't take in as much fat, but the problem is there's all this stored unburnt fuel sitting there as acetyl CoA, as acyl carnitines, and it takes a long time to work through that backlog before I can burn that glucose again. When I do start burning the glucose, now I'm generating NAD plus, and as long as I continue to burn that glucose, as the time after the meal goes on, right, fat will start coming back in. But now, since I'm generating all this NAD plus via pyruvate dehydrogenase, I can burn that fat cleanly instead of having it build up as acyl carnitines and acetyl CoA and all this unburnt stuff. That's kind of my thinking about how a healthy metabolism versus an unhealthy one. But the problem is it's taken me quite a while to figure out how to efficiently burn the glucose again, right? It sounds good, but it's a non-trivial problem.
But you actually referred to something I want to ask you, because you said, okay, that when we burning glucose, we have a high NAD plus ratio to NADH ratio, and when we're in keto, we have exactly the opposite. So is there a do we prefer one or the other? And I mean, why would one, I mean, if one is doing keto and he has low NAD plus, is that a problem? So is there a population, a percentage of people doing keto that maybe don't want to have a high NADH to NAD plus ratio? I mean, because these are completely two different ratios, right?
Yes. I think within any given individual, if you're efficiently burning glucose at the moment, you're going to have a higher NAD plus to NADH ratio. I think that's just how the system works.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not to say that one can't be, when you're in a ketogenic state, you're going to have a lower NAD plus to NADH ratio. I think that is probably true for 90% of people.
Does this represent a problem? That's what I'm trying to say.
Again, it's like, I don't think that's pathology. I don't think that's pathological. I think that's just the nature of the two fuels, right? Diesel burns differently than gasoline, right? It's a different engine technology. So I don't know that that's pathological. Because and that may just be the way that it is, and it's fine, right? As long as you're doing keto, if you're ketogenic and it's working, I think that's fine. Obviously,
because you're
there are lots of
we
have lots of examples of humans, of cultures that are living primarily on fat, right? The Eskimos, native bison hunting Native Americans. So we know that this system can work in the long term, right? Like, I don't think it's a problem. I just, for me, I'm interested in sort of figuring out the other side of the coin, which, yeah.
I understand. So because then the follow-up question for me is if that's a system, if we want to be insulin sensitive and we want to be able to burn glucose efficiently when it comes into a ketogenic state, maybe, I'm not sure, then how fast can the system be retrained, right? And then would one, just speculating because now you've gone the other side, but should one include maybe once or twice a day where I wouldn't call it carb refueling, but just sticking more with carbs rather than fat, like once a week or something? I mean, would that how?
Yeah, I mean, I've even thought about the idea of waking. So, I've thought about the idea of what would happen if you woke up. So, I like the idea of if you're gonna do carbs, go big.
Yeah.
I don't particularly like the idea of I'm mostly ketogenic, but I'm gonna have two potatoes with my meal, right? Like that to me is sort of like getting into swampland. To me, if you're gonna do carbohydrates, then um, wake up and have pancakes, because like I say, I think that you need, especially if you've been ketogenic, you might have that excess unburned fuel. You need enough carbohydrate and enough insulin long enough, and enough glucose to make that switch. And if you've been ketogenic, if probably the whole reason you're on a ketogenic diet is you weren't that metabolically healthy in the first place, or you would have just kept on doing whatever you were doing,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So most of us, I think, need, if you want to try to make that jump to burning carbs, I think you need a large, mostly carbohydrate meal. Like the pancakes that I eat in the morning, I've made this test meal for myself. It's on fireinaBottle.net. It's like the top post right now. You can look it up. But it's like 80%, 87% carbs is the macro. And so I do that because I want to wake up and get the unburned fuel out and generate some NAD plus and see if I can make that side of my metabolism go right. And I think if I was to get up and say, okay, well, I'm going to do bacon and eggs, but I'm going to have toast, right? That's not going to give me that same effect of, generating enough insulin and enough glucose to burn up that like store of fuel, right? If I was gonna have bacon and eggs, I think it's better just to have the bacon and the eggs,
Yeah,
right?
I
And
agree.
just stay in that fat burning mode. There's no reason to really add a bunch of glucose to that equation because I don't think you're going to burn it really very effectively at all.
Yeah,
Um,
but that's a
so
good
I
one.
would say almost, yeah, if you're going to do it,
So wake up, or also would that make a difference? So if I wake up, I have my bacon and eggs, okay, and for lunch, let's say I'm not very hungry, or I'll have some carbs, and then but I'll just have, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 fruit, and then maybe for dinner I have I don't know, my steak, for example. Would
right,
that
sure.
be a strategy like having one meal which is only carbs work, or would that thing backfire, do you think?
Well, I think it's very, I think it's going to be very individualized, right? I think that if you're, I think if you're metabolically healthy, I think if you're burning efficiently and you can have enough, you can, get enough glucose in that one meal that you can switch over and burn those carbs. I don't, yeah, I think that should be fine. But I think it does depend a lot on the individual, right? And how
Exactly.
flexible are you? Do you have elevated branched chain amino acids? I think that probably makes a big difference.
So here are the two questions I'm trying to lead up to now, because there are two. One is, why have pancakes? I mean, how do you rate pancakes versus fruits? Because you're trying to reduce branched chain amino acids. Yeah, so why not have fruit? I mean, there's no something more glycemic than fruit. I mean, depending on the fruit, but okay. and then you can really have, I guess maybe satiety. I don't know how you approach it, but that's one. And the other thing, well, let's answer that, and then we have.
Yeah. So, so this is a question I get all the time.
Yeah.
So for me, I don't. There's a couple reasons. So one, to be clear, the pancakes that I have are made with cassava flour, which is like has almost no protein in it. Cassava is like the purest form of starch on the planet. Like it's all starch and nothing else. So they're cassava flour pancakes, and so I'm really not getting any branched-chain amino acids with that meal, except that I use an egg in the recipe because it just makes the pancakes better. So it's one egg. That's the amount of protein that I'm getting, and that seems fine. Oh, and I put a scoop of gelatin in it as well, actually. So there's glycine there too. Um, anyway, and so to me, I don't find fruit to be, I don't know. To me, starch is very, if I eat pancakes, I feel like I've had a real meal. I feel like that meal keeps me satiated for hours and hours. I will eat that around 8:30 or 9 a.m. maybe, and I won't eat again till probably 2, 3 in the afternoon, like maybe 6 hours later. Um, I don't get that same kind of like rock solid satiation out of fruit.
Okay.
And I don't know why that is. And I don't really feel like if I just eat fruit, I feel like that's a snack. It doesn't
Yeah.
feel like a meal to me. Like
Probably
there's just
satiety that
something,
we can. Yeah, it's a
yeah,
satiety,
there's something
not
about the
a.
solidity of pancakes.
Okay, good. Uh, then, okay, so we put okay, someone. Let's take that because we're talking about metabolically unhealthy people. So we take the individual that comes here and brings a glucose tolerance test, which is, he starts with a fasting glucose of 100, and that's actually a real example. He or she gets the glucose tolerance test. The insulin, which is around 10, goes up to 50 and stays around there for 2 hours. And the glucose from 100 never comes back to 100, stays to 120 or so. That's one example. And then we have some other examples, which I've also seen with people who have fasting insulin of 50, right? Which is like through the sky.
Right.
So do both people, or let's say, does this group of people would benefit or would see the benefits of this high carb diet? So is this approach you're following, let's say, applying, it can apply to everyone, or
Yeah. So,
yeah,
so, um, there was a study, uh, I'm pretty sure it was a Kevin Hall study, and I'm blanking, and not everyone loves Kevin Hall, but to me, it's a very well done study, and he did in his short term. I think it was only a month. It might only have been 2 weeks on each diet, but what he showed is that in the short term, one group of people were on a high starch diet. It was less than 10% of calories as fat, and in that group, fasting blood glucose and fasting insulin both dropped significantly, right? And then they did a keto arm of the trial, and the same thing happened, right? But whether or not people, and these were the same people, right? I think they did one diet for 2 weeks, and then they went back to eating normally, and then they did the other diet for 2 weeks. So regardless of whether or not the people went on to a ketogenic diet or a very low fat diet, um, fasting blood glucose and fasting insulin levels dropped. And so, I think that's right. That's the thing about insulin and glucose. It's like, yes, eating starch or whatever, eating carbohydrates, increase insulin in the short term, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to in the long term. And I think, again, part of my thinking in this is that it's because of the idea that when you're burning glucose, you can generate more NAD plus. You can get some of that extra unburnt fuel out of your mitochondria, and it's that extra unburnt fuel in the mitochondria that is really holding back your metabolic rate, I think. And so to me, but then I look at that, right? And so I was looking at that Kevin Hall study, and that's when but I was also looking at these branched chain amino acid studies, and also these studies with collagen, right? And I'm saying, okay, well, if collagen and glycine can help unclog your mitochondria, and if if we could reduce the branched chain amino acids and then do a low fat approach, right? I'm sort of combining ideas from 3 different studies. One is the Kevin Hall study showing that a high carb diet can reduce fasting insulin. Another one is a study showing that reducing branched chain amino acids can help with insulin resistance. And then a third one is supplementing with collagen. Supplementing with collagen can lower your fasting blood glucose. And so I'm doing all 3 of those, right? I'm doing connective tissues, I'm doing low fat, and I'm avoiding BCAAs, and so far it seems like it's working. It's working great. So, yeah, I would say sure that someone with high fasting blood glucose, it's not a reason to not consider a low fat diet, for a while. And I don't, my long term goal is not to stay on this particular diet forever. This diet is like can I use this to leverage, get my insulin sensitivity back, lose weight, and then transition to something that's more of a, ultimately I'd like to transition to a French style diet, right?
I
That's
know,
the
I
goal.
know. I heard
That's the goal, right?
super.
But you have to admit that when you look at France, or if you look at the American diet of 100 years ago, people could eat that diet and be totally healthy. And the question is, obviously what went wrong? Can we get back to that, right? And so that's really my goal is to get back to that style of it. I wouldn't really French; it would be more of an American style diet. But yeah, right. You see
it's a very interesting concept because it leaves a bit the macros out. Probably, and because France, I think, well, it makes actually what you make the argument for is that the swampland should be having more, I guess, saturated fat, right? And that can make
right.
the difference, right? So, but before going there, because you're doing all this, which is great, and I love, or I think your success is great, and it should serve as an example. Because I'm doing keto, right, and I believe in keto, but primarily I want the people I help to have success in what they're doing, right? So, and not everyone, for whatever reason, wants to go full keto. So if I tell people start eating butter or what have you, it doesn't matter. There is some resistance, right? So if a high carb diet is something that is more applicable to them, then and they find success, then that would be also great, at least for the short term. So it's like we need to be open-minded here. But the point or how you're approaching everything at the moment in our discussion is about metabolic health, which is super important, lowering blood glucose, lowering insulin resistance. What about weight loss, right? So where does this come into? Is this a weight loss will come eventually as a result of being more metabolically healthy? How do you approach it?
Right. So my thesis is that if you can fix your metabolic health, then you will lose weight, and it'll happen because your mitochondria are now burning cleanly, right? You've gotten rid of all the excess acetyl CoA, you've gotten rid of the buildup of unburnt fuels, and now you will start to have a metabolism more like a lean person, right? And that's the key, right? If you look at lean people, At least, people that are truly metabolically healthy, let's say, um, they are very metabolically flexible. They eat calories, they burn it, right? They don't worry too much about weight because it's not a problem for them. And so I think that's correct, right? I think to me, there's this chicken and egg question that a lot of people say, well, if you lose the weight, then you'll be more metabolically healthy. Uh, I actually think it should be the other way around. I think that you can get metabolically healthy and use that as a lever to lose weight. And I have been. I made this promise that I would do this for 28 days and then I would release my results off the scale. But the sneak preview is I am losing weight, and I'm losing weight steadily and fairly quickly. Um, Eating these pancake, eating this large pancake
What's the
breakfast every
trick?
day.
What's the trick? Let's call it trick, or the process of losing weight. Then in this case of in a high fat diet, because okay, when in keto, most people say, okay, you reduce your insulin, which makes then or exaggerates lipolysis. So you have more free fatty acids from your own fat going, which then turn into ketones, and ketones can only be either used for energy or excreted. So very simply, somehow that's how the process works. So where we want to see a lot of free fatty acids. Now, when you're eating, and we haven't brought intermittent fasting in this picture, so let's assume we're not doing intermittent fasting. So then we have high carb diets, okay? So we improve insulin sensitivity. So insulin may go up, but it goes down to baseline. But at the end, how does this losing weight through burning our own free fatty acids work? Because I guess the lipolysis is less than when doing keto, right?
Right. Yes. And so here's the thing. Right. So insulin reduces lipolysis, but it doesn't reduce it to zero, right? And it's never zero. And so if you look at the free fatty acid curve, if you eat a large starchy meal, I'm trying to in my head think it's for about 2 hours, your free fatty acids are quite low. But then over the next about 4 hours, you have this steady increase in free fatty acids. And so to me, and like I say, I do my big meal. I'm doing 2 big starchy meals a day, right? And so there's usually a 6-hour lag between the 2 meals, something like that on average. And so in those, let's say 4 hours between, so I eat the big starchy meal right now. I'm burning glucose. That means I'm making NAD plus. My glycogen stores are full, so I have more glucose to burn. And it's like I was saying before, as those free fatty acids rise in the 6 hours after the meal, they're going to be steadily burned as a higher proportion of the fuel that I'm burning. But since I'm efficiently burning glucose, I'm generating enough NAD plus that I can burn those fats cleanly. And they're not going to raise NADH and to raise acetyl-CoA to the level that kicks me out of glucose burning, which is, what happens in the Randle cycle, or at least they'll do that to a much lower extent. And so increasingly in the 6 hours between meals, I'm burning more and more and more of my own free fatty acids. And, my argument with this approach is that it is the NAD plus production of pyruvate dehydrogenase that's allowing me to burn those fats cleanly, in a way that,
Is your
being me
metabolism
as me,
is
being
your
me as me, I
metabolism
might not be able to do it as well burning pure fat. Right? Maybe. I mean, that's the theory.
But is your always saying, because cleanly is one word, maybe efficiently is another word, and then just to say that you're actually becoming, I don't know, from a Fiat Porsche, and then you're not only, and the efficiency actually also translates into a higher metabolic rate.
Right. And the reason, and I actually use the word cleanly for for a reason. Um, it's because I so I make the analogy a lot of a carburetor, right?
Yeah, I heard this.
Right. And so if you have enough oxygen, um, you'll burn the fuel, right? But if you for people who don't know, cars in the 80s had a thing called, and before that had a thing called a carburetor that mixes the air and the fuel. And if you get enough air in the mixture, which is the NAD plus, it all burns, and that's clean burning fuel. But if you add too much fuel and there's not enough oxygen, what happens is not all the fuel burns, and you get like black smoke comes out the tailpipe of the car. And so that, to me, that's the reason I say clean burning, is because we don't want, right, we don't want the unburnt fuel coming out of the tailpipe. And in this analogy, this is the buildup of these acylcarnitines. And if you look at an obese person, they have a buildup of acylcarnitines in their mitochondria, and they have a buildup of acylcarnitines in their bloodstream. And so that's what I mean by clean, is that you don't have all of this extra unburned fuel circulating around looking for a place to burn, right? That's sort of what seems to be happening in obesity. And so therefore you never are burning efficiently, because you have this lag, you have all this unburned stuff just sitting there.
Okay, cool, good. And then to close the keto chapter, so most people argue, no, not argue, but say that okay, high ketones is a indication of fat burning, right? Because you have higher free fatty acids, and then more energy to be used or burned. So in this case, would you, and I don't know if that's true, actually. I think probably it's not true, but in any case, when we're talking about high carb diets, do you think that the people with high carb diets would, and maybe yourself, you monitoring it, would have some ketones? Because at the end, you're doing 2 meals, you're in 6 hour window, so you're still doing 18-hour fasting. So would you still expect ketones in your system?
Yeah. So, well, everyone has some ketones all the time. I think that is safe to say. And so, there's kind of a threshold level, and I can't think of what it is off the top of my head, that we set to say you're in ketosis. But we all make
Zero point
ketones all the
0.5
time.
usually. 0.
And what one of the really interesting things about that Kevin Hall study that I talked about, where he did keto versus low fat, is that when people did the low fat diet, their ketones increased. Um, which I mean is very interesting. I don't know why. And of course they didn't increase to nearly the level of people on a ketogenic diet. But for some reason ketones went up. I don't know.
Because for me, ketones are part of a metabolic health, right? So you want to produce some ketones because it means that you're actually effectively burning your free fatty acids, either what you ate or because you're not snacking all the day. So you're doing two meals a day, for example, and then that's somehow you need to use not only the
Yeah,
carbohydrates but also the fat, right?
right. And I actually think I'm just, this is complete speculation. I'm just thinking off the top of my head. I think you can actually make ketones from glucose. That's not usually how we think about it, but I think any source of acetyl CoA can be used to make a ketone, and probably is in certain scenarios. It's just that's not usually how it works, because when you eat glucose, yeah, you don't have the high free fatty acid. The liver usually makes most of the ketones,
Yeah.
and when free fatty acids are high, then liver makes a lot of ketones. Anyway, that's not really an important point. I'm just thinking about how it works, but Yeah, I don't know why, but yeah, for some reason, people on the low-fat diet, ketones went up, which I find to be a very interesting random tidbit.
Uh, uh, do you eat in a caloric deficit, or you eat to satiety? How does it work these days with you?
I eat to satiety for sure. Yeah, so like I said, the two big meals that I have, uh, when I'm done, I don't want another bite for sure for a long, long time. So it's yeah, so it's two very large meals, and I will in between the meals, I'll snack on. I eat a lot of apples. I live in apple country, so it's something easy to just have on the table, and I snack on those. You know, that's by far the most common thing that I snack on.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's really two big meals, and the meals, you know, if I tally up the meals, they're usually about 1,000 calories each. The dinner can be a little more; it can be like 1,200. And then I snack and I drink wine with dinner, so that's another several hundred calories in there. So my guess is if you add it all up, I'm probably consuming 2,800 calories. That's what I think on days when I really try to count everything and really tally it.
Okay. That's a lot actually, or a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a kind of a normal amount for,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think, for an adult male. You know, so I'm sort of eating uh the number of calories that they say that I should. Um, but obviously, right now at the moment, a lot of it's coming from carbohydrate um, and yeah, and obviously very little from.
So what's your take then on calorie counting and calories? So are you completely dismissive of the concept?
Uh, Kind of.
Good. I agree.
I mean, right. So at the end of the day, of course, there is a physical reality that, um, sure, ultimately the number of calories that go in have to sort of equal the number of calories that goes out. But like that's right, that's from the perspective of a physicist. I mean, sure, of course that's true in some kind of physical way, right? Like matter can't be created or destroyed, you know, kind of way. But it's not a very useful thing to say because because so many different things can change your metabolic rate. And people are always focusing on calories in, and I think that's actually the wrong way to look at it. I think the calories out are the more important thing. And I don't mean that everyone should run to the gym, right? And I'm not against going to the gym. I'm just saying that if you're obese and if you're struggling with your weight, and I can tell you because I've tried this many times in my life, you're not going to exercise your way out of it without changing your diet. That's not how it works, right? So, and many studies back me up on this. That's my personal experience, and many studies have showed this, that you can't just exercise your way out of obesity by increasing calories out, because you get hungrier and there's different things. There's all these feedback loops that kick in,
And
right?
there's a
And so
plateau as well, right? So you cannot burn an infinite amount of calories. So your metabolic rate has a higher level.
right, yeah, exactly. And so I think, so in my mind, it really is about, yeah, I mean, I think there's that word again. What I want to say is, you want your mitochondria to burn cleanly, and I think that's right. I think that's right. I think we need to, like, and I think if we can do that, then the rest kind of takes care of itself. And I read a lot of rodent studies, you know, and studies in pigs and other animals. Um, Not everyone loves those stories, but I think you can learn a tremendous amount. And what you see in all of those studies is usually, um, when they do some type of manipulation that causes the mice to lose the weight, uh, it's always increased metabolic rate. It's never, well, I'm not going to say never. It's very rarely that they're like, okay, we did this and the mice ate less and calories were reduced and they lost the weight. It's always we gave the mice this, we put them in a metabolic chamber, they started burning more calories and they lost the weight. That seems to be the way that it works, at least in rodents. But I feel fairly certain. But
this is very important.
now, having said that, John Speakman in China did a study, and what he found was that the leanest people in China have the highest resting metabolic rates and are the least active people. Like, these are people who literally their metabolic rate is so high that they just don't have any energy left to even get up and walk around. These are very lazy people because they're burning off all their calories, right? They're very lean. These are people with BMIs of like 17, right? Extraordinarily lean people.
Wow, you need to tell me this study. That's super interesting.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting study. And so, it's not like, right, we have this thing, it's like, oh yeah, lean people are very active and they're out hiking mountains, and it turns out that's actually not true at all. The leanest people have no energy left because they already
you spoke about rodents, but I see everyday ladies, and I wanted your opinion on that as well, that they cannot lose weight, and they've tried everything, but they eat so less that they eat less. They eat, I don't know, 800 calories. At the end, they eat also, I guess, chicken and broccoli. So they have no carbs or fat probably in their diet. They're under caloric and they cannot lose weight, right?
Yeah, well, that's the best way to lower your metabolic rate is just eat less.
Yeah,
right. That's the single best way to lower your metabolic rate. It works right away. It works every time.
Like a charm.
Just eat less. Your metabolic rate will drop.
Yeah.
It's that easy. And so, and I talk about this, right? And so, this is another Kevin Hull paper, but he did this study on people who were in this. In America, we have this show called The Biggest Loser, and they take a bunch of very obese people, and they put them on this reality show, and they have a health coach, and they basically starve themselves for X number of weeks. The show goes on, and they're training and they're doing all these things, and then at the end of the show, the one who loses the most weight wins or whatever. And so he actually studied the metabolic rate of the people that went on this show before the show, after the show, and then followed up 7 years later with the contestants. And in the 7-year follow-up, they had permanently lowered their fasting metabolic rate significantly by going on this show and starving themselves to lose this weight. I was a wrestler in high school, and I was chubby, right, in the off season. And so every year, I basically did The Biggest Loser. I did it 4 times in high school, right? 4 years in a row. I basically starved myself, and it was wrestling season. So I was doing essentially 2 hours of calisthenics every day, and just starved myself for 2 months at a time to go from 185 pounds down to 155 pounds. And so then, you realize that you've been living your whole life with this metabolic damage that you did to yourself as a high school wrestler, probably. And so, no, I don't like the idea. I don't like calorie restriction at all. And in fact, if you look at, if you look at people and you look at their, get under the hood, right? One of the things that predicts long-term development of diabetes, heart disease, you name it, mental depression, are increased desaturase enzymes. And there's a couple of them. One of them is the one that converts your saturated fat to monounsaturated fat, called SCD1, and another one is called D6D, delta 6 desaturase, and that one takes polyunsaturated fats and it puts another double bond in them, and that starts the process of them becoming like eicosanoids and these oxidized lipids, and the kind of the what we call the bad things, although it's more complicated than that, of course. And anyway, if you do caloric restriction, all of those desaturase enzymes increase, and increased desaturase enzymes predict onset of diabetes and predict onset of heart attack and predict onset of mental depression. So you can get all of that. All you have to do is eat less, right? That's all you have to do.
There is a dark side to fasting probably then as well, right? So
Yeah,
if you're not careful enough, I guess.
I suspect there is. Yeah. Yeah, and right, and so, and I talk about, right, and I make the analogy of torpor in mammals, right? And so the idea is that mammals are incentivized to gain weight for winter, and they change their metabolism in very specific ways. And if you look in an obese person, they have made all the same metabolic changes that an animal does in the fall as winter's oncoming. And the thing at the end, what ultimately starts the hibernation process is fasting, right? If you take the food away, like, so if you have a squirrel, a ground squirrel in the lab, and you make the days longer, or sorry, you make the days shorter and you make it colder, you know, you're kind of simulating the onset of winter. Take the food away, boom, their metabolism shuts down, they go into hibernation. Right. And so so that is a concern that I have with fasting. I'm like, well, that's actually how you totally shut down your metabolism. And obviously humans are not hibernators, right? We're not going to completely shut down, but I am concerned that that's what, you know, you're going to make a lot of those same metabolic changes.
Yeah.
And also, to be clear, some of those changes that the animals do in fall is they increase the desaturase enzymes SCD1 and D6D. And so, you know, these are all seem to be the same process, just looked at in slightly different lenses.
Interesting. So yeah, and so let's round it up a bit. So we have two methods: high carb, high fat, and both can potentially be good ways to improve your metabolic health. And it seems like in both scenarios, then the common denominator can be lower branched-chain amino acids and higher glycine. I mean, or you, at least that's what your experiments say, or is it?
Well, I don't know that. You know, I actually suspect there's two things happening. I suspect that the high, you know, the ketogenic diet will work for its own reasons, and the low fat diet will work for its own reasons. But then I think on top of that, you have this branched chain amino acid issue or question. And I think the reason that, like, so someone like myself, right? I wasn't burning, like, I'm clearly not burning the branched chain amino acids efficiently. That's probably, again, because I am, you know, I'm doing a lot of the things that a torpid mammal would do to try to conserve body fat mass. Because animals, when they hibernate, are very, they conserve their lean mass, right? They conserve muscle. They stop breaking down the muscle. And that's probably why I can't break down the branched chain amino acids. And it's all part of that cycle because the animal wants to be insulin resistant as winter approaches, right? And so if you think about it as part of this process, then it makes sense. So, but I think you could easily do ketogenic, low branched chain amino acid, high glycine, or you could do low fat, low branched chain amino acid, high glycine. Or what a lot of people have asked me about is, can I essentially eat in the swamp? Can I eat, you know, carbs and fat together and just do the low branched chain amino acid, high glycine thing? And the answer is I don't know, but it might work, right? It's another approach that has not really been tried by a lot of people. I think it's an interesting one, right? Like if maybe there is a middle ground that could work if you fix the amino acids. Last thing I want to say on that is that again, the branched chain amino acid thing I don't think is forever. If you get out of uh, your broken metabolism, I think the branched chain amino acids become very thermogenic and are probably a good thing to eat, right? I don't want people to get the message that branched chain amino acids are bad. I want people to get the message that right now you're in a metabolic state that maybe you are not processing your branched chain amino acids correctly, but that your goal should be to get out of that metabolic state ultimately and be able to burn them again.
I think, although I mean, actually, for me, I don't know if you measured it in your blood tests, but although we say and many people advocate for eating more protein and we're not eating enough protein and protect your muscle and all these things, which I agree. But when you're actually going and doing blood test and you're checking your BUN, your urea, then most people actually, what I typically now find that I notice it, have higher urea than usual, which is a breakdown of protein, which I don't know if that's a good indication or a link to having higher branched chain amino acids. But at the end, probably, I think in this case, at least for the keto people I see, especially if they cannot raise their ketones, then they're probably having too much protein, which most people do because they cut out all the carbs. So they eat steak, probably maybe the steak is not so fatty. So they can even, I think, go up to 40% of having protein in their macronutrients, right? So
yeah, which is a lot. I mean, you can't use, right? I mean, there's an upper limit to how much protein you can use. You're gonna have to break the rest down. I mean, that there's no two ways about it, right? That upper limit of what you can use is not, it's not terribly high. I I talk about this a lot. So I was a pig farmer, and I was working with a feed mill, and we were designing these non-GMO feeds. And so I actually designed a lot of the feeds, and um, even and there's research that they do in pigs, and they're trying to use lower protein diets with the pigs because there's less nitrogen, there's less urea in the manure, and it helps with the smell problem, right? And so even in a fast growing pig, they can't use, and a pig is gaining lean mass at an insane rate compared to any human ever could. And even a pig growing that fast only needs about 12% protein, um, ultimately. And so I feel like when we talk about how much protein does a human need, I think it has to be less than a rapidly growing pig, which is just packing on bulk lean mass every day. So my guess is it's somewhere below 12%. And maybe, the whole country of Ghana uh, gets about 8 to 8.5% protein in their diet. I was just looking at that the other day because they happen to eat a lot of cassava, and I've been eating cassava. So um, I was just looking around the world at what are protein levels in normal human diets, right? And so, um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's an interesting discussion of how much protein is
it's
really needed.
also maybe it's something that the keto community is pushing a lot, because most of the keto people are proponents of eating more meat, which then pushes a lot of, I mean, not intentionally, but pushes people eat more meat um, than they need, let's say.
Yeah, and right. Yeah, and obviously, I think that, yeah, when I do keto, it's definitely of the, very high rate, very high fat version of keto is what I would
Yeah.
normally do, or what I would recommend people to do, honestly.
And if you try to, I don't know if you've seen studies, but can you, what's the turnover of this BCA? So we said we want to lower BCAs because they're like in the mitochondria stacking up and they're causing issues. So if I don't eat, if I lower my protein, I don't know, 10%, for example, for a couple of days, would that do the trick, or how fast is the turnover?
Well, it's pretty fast. So in human trials, there's one trial that they did, and within 3 days of branched chain amino acid restriction, you see a real effect in humans. So it doesn't take long.
Okay.
But like I say, I saw when I not cut them out entirely, but when I dramatically cut back on them, I saw the change in my fasting blood glucose within a week.
Have you done the same, let's say, week with high protein? So were you transitioning to it?
Well,
Or
so here's what I have planned coming up. So like I say, I've been oops, sorry, battery's getting on. Oop, still there? Okay. So what I plan to do coming up is I've been doing this pancake meal every day, right? And one of the one of the reasons that I keep bringing it up is I want to use that as a kind of base to do experiments, right? And so I have this, everything's weighed out to the gram, right? I have it's the exact same recipe that I make every day, the same brands of the flours and the maple syrup that I use on it, right? It's all, so it's essentially a test meal. And then, so what I'm going to do is one day I'll put 40 grams of gelatin in the pancakes and I'll track my blood glucose over the next 2 hours. The next day I'll do 40 grams of whey protein, which is pretty high in branched chain amino acids, and see if I see a difference, and then, go and then repeat it, right? Go back to the gelatin and then go to the whey protein. And I think that's a good way of kind of like testing this idea out, that the branched chain amino acids are affecting my ability to burn glucose. And the one thing I don't know is this, like you say, is it an immediate response, or like, if I eat a bunch of whey protein one day, this is another thing I could try, right? Is like, I could eat a bunch of whey protein for dinner the night before and then see if it changes my response to the same pancake meal. So there's different things, but I intend to do some experimentation like that in the next couple of months, and just playing with it to really prove that prove to myself and prove to everyone that it really is the branched chain amino acids that are.
that would be a great experiment, because and I planning to do it as well, but be a bit more strict, because I also see quite a lot of variability in my glucose, and okay, it can be many things, but now my bet is on protein. So I mean, I think just measuring it, so I'm not so much worried or interested, at least in this point. Maybe I do it with a CGM about the response after the meal, but for sure I would like to see a steady, let's say, if I take, I don't know, 50 grams of protein or 100 grams of protein throughout the day, spread out in the meals, that the morning glucose is, I don't know, consistent around 80 or so, for example.
Right.
So I think that's,
yeah, I mean, I think it'd be interesting, right? I mean, I would be very interested in the results of that experiment in a keto context, right? Is the amount of protein that you consume in a day affecting your fasting glucose in a keto context? I think that's a super interesting and important question, right?
yeah. exactly. I agree. Maybe we do it together. You do the high carb
Yeah.
version, do the high fat version, and see how it works out.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that'd be cool. And then the other question from your end, another thing you could play with is, um, one day you get the same amount of protein from, steak, and the next day you get the same amount of protein from pork rinds, or
Yeah,
something that's more of a gelatin based protein,
I,
whatever. I mean,
yeah, that
I
would
like
be
beef,
great.
I like beef tendon and pork rinds and pig's feet, but they're not everyone's thing. But I like them.
I love them actually. So
Well, and you're in
I'll
Europe,
take
and
you
you're
up.
in Europe. You can probably get great head cheese.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah,
And now I'm in Greece as well, so I can I have plans to get my hands on all these things that I cannot find in Germany. Uh,
right.
so just we're already almost 1 hour and a half. So let's talk like 5 minutes about Swamp Land, because first of all to say, and I know you, I don't know if you're still chatting with Paul Saladino, but so are you in this case, Paul Saladino fan in the way he's implementing his diet? Because it
Yeah, I mean,
seems like it basically.
well, sorry, what were you gonna say? What was the last
It
sentence?
seems like you're you would approve of Paul Saladino's eating or
Yeah, it's
based diet.
funny. It's funny. I literally just talked to him yesterday, and we were talking about my idea, the emergence diet, and adding more starches, because uh, he's been doing honey
Yeah.
and he hasn't done any starches. And I was telling him, I was like, Paul, you're in Costa Rica. That's where I first tried cassava, actually, which is now my favorite root vegetable, by a lot. I think it's great. So I don't know if he's going to try it, but he's at least considering it. I know. So that'd be interesting. But yeah, but anyway, I've now lost track of what the.
So do you think the metabolically healthy people could
Right.
have
Swampland. Yeah. I think, sure. I think that if you're truly metabolically healthy, you should be able to, yeah, you should be able to switch back and forth. You should be able to eat cassava with, lunch or whatever, have a ketogenic dinner, and
uh,
uh,
Paul doesn't implement it like that, as far as I know, in the sense that he has both high fat and high carb in the same meal. So he has his high fat, I mean, steak
right. Well, and this
and,
is, I mean,
fruit, right?
right, and this is the definition of a croissant, right? I mean,
Yeah.
this is what the French do. This is what all Europeans do, really. Um, and what I was thinking about the other day, I worked with when I was in the butcher shop, we worked with a German master butcher, and in Germany, they always in the hot dogs and in the bratwurst, they add the pork skin to it. The hot dogs and the bratwurst are like 20% pork skin. And so in Germany, when you eat sausage, you're getting a lot of glycine. Um, and in America, that's illegal. The USDA does not allow you to add pork skin to any sausage or hot dogs. And so this to me is like a fascinating, variable difference between Germany and the US that no one
Think about
even knows about unless you're a butcher, which I
it.
happen to have been. And that's the only reason I know this, is I worked with this guy that came through the food processing company that I ordered this really expensive equipment from, right? That's the only reason that I even met this guy in the first place. And so it's fascinating, but it's very true. European meats have a lot more collagen in them. So it's like, that's a variable that nobody ever thought about, and I didn't even really, it was just the other day that it kind of hit me. Like,
Let me turn on the light 1 second.
oh yeah.
So, so do you think, I mean, supplementing, just going and getting some collagen or so would do the trick as well? Or
Yeah, sure. I think anyway. Yeah, I mean, I think anyway that I know collagen's a very popular supplement. Or gelatin. I think any way that you can get, or just bone broth, that people do. I think any of those things are totally fine, right? They're all good sources of glycine. Um, that seems to be the thing. I mean, there's other
how much
hydroxyproline and
glycine
other
do you
amino
add
acids.
per day? How much glycine do you add per day? I didn't see your recipe, but what I guess
So I just use a tablespoon of gelatin in the pancake. So that's like 10 grams of gelatin. And then
maybe
you
that's
like
five.
usually in the second meal I get more than that, right? So I don't think I ever get less than 30 grams in a day. It all just, the second meal changes a lot for me because I like to cook. So it varies, but like
So
the biggest, some days, I mean, one of the recipe I just put on my YouTube channel is tacos de chicharron, where you make tacos with pork rinds and a green sauce. And so that was like, that's like 40 or 50 grams of gelatin in those, or collagen in those pork rinds. So that would be like a very high day for me. It would be like 60 grams of
that's a lot.
collagen. And collagen is about 20% glycine. And in glycine supplementation studies in humans, you see big benefits with 8 grams a day. 8 to 10 grams a day seems like a sweet spot. So
That's what I use typically. I mean, I didn't use it for.
well, 8 to 10 grams of glycine. So times 5. So you'd be around 50 grams of collagen or gelatin would give you the 8 to 10 grams of glycine, 40 or 50, something like that.
So if you're in a swampland, right? So you have your saturated fat, you have your bread, you have your butter. So what will so that's the basis. So what mistake have people done from the swampland and they become metabolically unhealthy? It's all the polyunsaturated fats. That's what you're.
Right. I think the unsaturated fats are a big component of it. And they're probably the most important component of it. Although, I have been thinking more about the protein thing, and like, I think that, when you look at Americans on average, I think we are less metabolically healthy than Europeans. I think Europeans maybe eat less. I think maybe they eat less total protein. Americans love their like lean chicken breast. And and I think Europeans are getting more in France, right? They're eating terrine, which is head cheese, which is gelatin. When they make their what's the bean dish, the cazoulette, right? Which is these slow cooked beans, which is like a famous Sunday meal in Southwest France. But that has the pig's foot in it, and it has the ham hock with the skin on it, right?
Yeah.
So there's gelatin in there. In Germany, when they're eating their bratwurst, it's 20% pork skin. And so I think that the Europeans are smart about incorporating more of the gelatin rich parts of the pig, right? It's mostly from pork. And they're probably eating less kind of like lean, things like chicken breast, and just like lean proteins in general, maybe. And I think that plus the vegetable oils and the unsaturated fats are
So you
probably the
don't
thing.
put in the category, so pork here in Greece, I mean also in Germany. So I'm in between Germany and Greece. So I mean people eat a lot of pork. I mean like
Yeah.
Uh, so you don't put pork in the same category, right? So like, or do you put it in the high polyunsaturated linoleic acid?
Well, I mean, it all depends. And so this is another difference, right? In that American pork has always been corn finished, right? And so corn has more oil in it than barley, which is what is traditionally used in European pork. It's usually finished on barley, and that's changed somewhat over the years. Like, and so that makes a big difference in terms of the polyunsaturated fat content of the final meat. It also changes with the genetics of the pig, and so I think the whole world has gone to um, these leaner breeds of pigs, and the lean breeds of pigs have more polyunsaturated fat, I think, on average. Um, and so I think you have multiple trends. I think if you went back to 1980, what you'd find is that the European pigs have a lot less polyunsaturated fat than the American pigs. That might be changing as we move forward, but I do think that in general, the Europeans are making much better use of the collagen-rich parts of the pig.
Yeah, for sure. But I think this whole discussion I think it's very important because I find, I mean, in Europe, people don't use so much seed oils. I mean, it's like, I cannot, I mean, typically, for example,
Sorry, you said people you're in Europe, people don't what?
don't use seed oils. I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
you might, here and there,
I
but
mean, I think restaurants use them.
yeah, okay,
What you
restaurants,
see is what you see mostly in Europe uses sunflower oil.
yeah, because well, yeah, when you have chips, etc., and then you go to whatever restaurant, they reuse it just for cost reasons. But typically, the households don't have, unless, I mean, maybe only for potatoes, like frying potatoes, because you put you need a lot of oil. But
Right.
everything else is olive oil, at least here in Greece and in Germany. I mean, you also find lard and everything. So, I mean.
Right.
Yeah, but on the other hand, it's also, I mean, I see a lot of people they're super scared of eating pork. They cut out pork completely out of their lives because, I mean, there's also a lot of, all these influencers, let's call them like that, from the States that say, okay, pork has screwed up omega-3 to omega-6, profile, etc., what have you. And then this can also lead you to issues like that, where you're not getting any collagen if you're not careful with your
Right.
diet.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think pork is far and away the best sort of traditional dietary source of collagen.
Yeah.
Um, there's not much else. I mean,
Eh,
in Asia they get chicken feet,
in Asia,
duck feet.
because now I'm monitoring a bit the scene there. I mean, there is the to-go meat they have is the pork, right? So all the delicacies
Right.
stuff that they cook, everything is pork. So,
Right.
and the Koreans have the highest living age throughout the world, 91. So I think that probably
Yeah.
says
Well,
something.
and the Koreans do though a lot of broth, right? A lot of like beef broth and
Yeah,
beef stew and the beef tendon in the stew. I mean, um, right? These are classic.
has a broth inside. So yeah,
Yeah. So that's a lot of collagen.
it's a lot of. So um maybe I mean, just to close off, I think maybe if you would like, we could design a little experiment. Maybe I can also get more people, so it doesn't have to be n equals 1
Right.
on my keto experiment. So
I
maybe,
think that
and then we can design a bit of a little, I don't know, week, 2 weeks, 1 month, whatever, of diet to see what's the effects.
Yeah, and my guess is it wouldn't take.
It
My
wouldn't take
guess is in
so
2
long.
weeks we could.
Yeah.
My guess is in 2 weeks we could get plenty of data if people would be consistent with it. Maybe
when are you
maybe
planning
do
to start?
like a 3 or 4 day like very low protein to start, and then see
Yeah.
what happens, and then go back and forth. Do a couple days of high protein and then a couple days of collagen or something. But
I did a 3 days sardine and eggs fast type of thing. And I think 3 days was plenty to give me all the data I needed for this type of thing. So
right, yeah.
I think that's plenty. Okay. When are you planning to kind of go with that?
I am probably gonna start with it like early November. I'm gonna be in Buffalo for a week. I probably won't start it there. It'll probably be when I get back here. That's, I think, like around November 5th or 6th. So it'll probably be right after that. So that's only about a week.
Okay, so maybe I'll talk to a few of the keto people here, and then maybe we can catch up and plan something out. And I'll think about it. I'll send it over to you as well and see what you think, and then we can have something comparable.
Right. I think that sounds great.
Cool. It was nice chatting.
Yes.
I'll send you the video. I think potentially you
Yeah,
can
that
use
sounds great.
the things. So, and we talk in a week's time or so. Yeah,
That sounds perfect. Let's do it.
great, man. Thanks.
All right.
Thanks for the
Good to
chat.
talk to you.
Have a good day.
Bye.
Take care. Bye bye.